Well, does anybody out have any questions and any projects you're working on? I mean, I'm going to follow up with the last class on the spaceship and that when we start class. But if you've got any kind of unique questions, fire away. Otherwise, we'll talk about fishing.
Hey, Randy,
Yes, Greg.
what do you do when you lose power to get back to your same spots?
On the machine.
You're right.
So the best way to do that is when you set up your machine with your file is your machine, which you have an HD 510 you mentioned. The HD series tools have a homing routine that allow you to calibrate the machine to the lower left corner and zero out the machine. And then from that position, you use your pendant. And let's say you're going to put your board out in the middle of the table. What I tell people to do is move the pendant out like 12 in the Y, 12 in the X, and make that the middle of your board if that's the kind of setup you're using. And then re-zero your machine to that location. So now if your power goes out, you could rehome your machine because that's a fixed location on the machine. And then you could move back out 12 and 12 and be back at the middle of your work.
Okay.
You follow that?
Yeah, I was thinking about drilling a hole like in the waist area and then recording that location.
Well, that's what the home position is. The home position, there are a couple of switches or sensors on the machine that when you run the machine with the homing routine, it goes over the left side, it touches off of the sensor, bounces back about 1/4 of an inch, and automatically calibrates that location as machine 0 in the X, and then it comes forward and does the same thing and automatically calibrates that as machine Y0. And so you've got this lower left, which is commonly referred to as home position or machine 0. And it's repeatable every time you start your machine. And that way, if you then use your pendant as a digital ruler and you move out a fixed amount, like I said, 12 and 12 or whatever, wherever you're going to set up your file, you can easily repeat that.
Okay.
The idea you were talking about, a hole in the table, with certain machines, and I think the SD100 does not have homing, and I don't think SD110 has homing on it. So actually that hole in the table routine is something I do myself. So I'll take on the smaller machines, I'll what's called hard stop the machine, where I'll take it over to the left side. It'll grind the motors a little bit, come to the front, grind the motors a little bit. It doesn't hurt the motors. It's just magnet skipping. But I've basically created an absolute lower left 0 point for that machine, like the SD100.
Okay.
And then I'll move back in maybe 1 inch in both directions. And then I'll use a router bit and I'll bore a hole down right there for a 1/4 inch router bit. Now I know where essentially 1 is on that machine.
Well, what I was thinking about doing was drilling the hole in the waist area of my project and
Sure.
recording that data point.
That works as well. Yeah, but since you've got homing switches, it's actually way more accurate and easier. So, I don't know if you got an email or not. So I do a series of webinars for Next Wave. One is called Getting Started for people that are thinking about buying a machine or just bought a machine. And then I also do one on a pendant that actually shows how to do that routine.
Okay.
You know what I'll do this next email? I'm going to make a note of it. The next series of webinars are coming up in middle of September. And I'll put that in the email as well, but I'll also send you links to the last ones if you guys want to view the ones that are already out there either way.
Okay.
Randy.
You'll see that webinar, that homing routine in there. And I think once you understand it, you'll find it really useful.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, that'd be
Randy.
interesting. Sorry about that, Greg.
Sorry.
Go ahead.
I was just going to ask you, Randy, if sometime you could put up some of the work you've done. Like, I'd love to see, not to copy it or anything, but just to see some of the work you've done.
Yes. In fact, I'm actually should be up in a couple of months. I've got a guy who's developing a website for me, and I actually plan to post it there. But I also can bring up some pictures next time within the class here and show you some of the things too.
Great. Thank
Yeah.
you. Look forward to it.
Randy, I have one more question.
Yes, John.
Is it advantageous to get a 6-foot cord for my computer to my CNC, or could I use a thumb drive?
Which machine do you have?
I have the HD4,
The
the
HD4.
Sharp.
Oh, right. Okay. And you've had it for a while?
Yes,
Okay. So you currently use a thumb drive to take the
no,
files to
I
it
have been using a 6-foot patch cord.
with a thumb drive?
No, I don't use the thumb drive at all, but I was asked why I don't use a thumb drive.
So you're using like their Control 2.0 or something on the
I am,
computer?
yes.
Ah, well, the good news for that is a thumb drive has some real advantages because it's easy, it's quick with the pendant. They actually, and there's also a new version, and I think your tool, I actually don't know. So there's something called Ready to Control, which is actually one of the webinars, the third of the series that I teach. But I think your tool in HD4 can use Ready to Control, which is a step up from what you currently have.
Mhm.
And Ready to Control also attaches to your CNC, just like you're doing now, if you like that. But I've not used the number 2 controller much, very little. I guess I'm surprised you're not using the thumb drive, because that's usually the way people do it, and it's pretty convenient.
I always thought that if I used that, if I had a really large pattern that I'm trying to do, that if I had a power failure or anything, I couldn't get back to where I started. I would
Can you
lose
do
everything.
that? Can you do that with Control 2?
I can by going down to, and because I used the pendant, I go back down to my lower left-hand corner and start over.
But with your control panel that you have hooked on your computer, you're able to start mid-file?
No, I'm not.
Okay,
I
I
haven't
didn't.
tried that.
Yeah, okay, so
I believe that I have seen it. I'm just not familiar with it, and I've avoided it.
well, I tell you what, once again, when I send out these webinar links, the one called Getting Started and the pendant one, the two for, well, actually all three of them in your case, you would probably find them all very informative as far as your question about should you use the pendant or the computer hooked to the machine. The machine can be operated both ways. All I know about that Control 2 that they have out there, which is several years old, is that they're trying to eventually, I guess, discontinue it because it's not as powerful as the new one. And, you don't have a very old tool, and HD4 is not that old. So
No,
it should read the new ones. I mean, I used the HD4 exclusively, well, before I got the HD5, that was the tool I had. So
my wife won't let me spend that money.
So are you aware that there is an upgrade for your tool, just the gantry part of it?
No, I'm not.
Yeah, so you'll have to check on their website. Might be $1,000. And that's what I did for my tool. And it brings the tool up to HD5 standards because the gantry was the major improvement. And wow, does it make a difference in the robustness of the tool? And it's not a total budget breaker either.
No, I'll look at that.
Yeah, gantry upgrade for the HD4. I can find that out at their website. You're running a router or a spindle, John?
Unmute that. I'm using a router.
Okay. Like a Bosch, DeWalt
I
type?
have the DeWalt.
Yeah. How's that working out for you?
Oh, I like it. It's one of the brushless ones, newer,
Oh,
and it's a little quieter, but it's really powerful.
yeah. I've used routers on several machines and they, the spindle's nice and quiet, but the routers are less expensive and they do a good job.
They much do. And then I can take this over to the lathe of the router, that is, and then use it on the lathe when I'm using my lathe and I'm trying to put spirals into platters and stuff that I'm turning.
Got it.
And so it makes it, universal back and forth.
Sure.
I used
You're
the
very
flute.
talented, John.
Oh, thank you. I used the Flute Master tool out of Dick Weber out of Oklahoma City.
Okay.
Randy, is the fourth axis really challenging? I mean, I'm not even near learning all the stuff I need to learn for, but is it like, oh my gosh, it's unbelievably difficult?
No, it's not unbelievably difficult. Laying out the files are a little tricky only because you have to think in the round, as they say, and then you use a different post processor, setting it up and calibrating it. A
Yeah.
lot of the principles of CNC all apply. You're just doing it differently in the round from the time you design it to the time you cut it. And
Yeah.
no, but it's a fun little tool, actually. I've done a variety of things. On one of the big projects I did a couple of years ago was a whole bunch of pens,
Oh, wow.
pen making. I did a presentation for Vectric for that.
Do you do much with laser?
I don't do a lot with laser. I've done some with laser. There was a point where NextWave actually had a standalone laser machine, and I played with that for a while.
Uh-huh.
And I get asked a lot about that. And I do plan to, they're going to be sending me, they're working on an update for the software, and I'm waiting for that from Vectric and NextWave. But I am going to then actually do some more with that. And that's one of the classes or webinars that I want to put together sometime this coming year, because there are a lot of people that like the laser and they've got questions about it. And again, it's a little like the fourth axis. It's a whole nother environment of
Yeah.
information, a lot of carryover, but some different things to think about.
Yeah, I've tried it. It's just hard to get it where it's either not too dark or, I mean, who knows? But I did try it. It turned out okay. But
that's a real good explanation of some of the challenges. And
Yeah.
the new software is supposed to help with that. And like I
Oh.
said, it's yet to be seen. But
Yeah.
we'll see when that comes out.
great.
Hey, Randy, this is Margie. Quick question.
Yes.
One, what you were talking about earlier about an upgrade, or were you talking about that for the Shark HD4
I was.
machine? Can you put that in the chat? Because I was entering in as you guys were talking about it.
Yeah, I saw that note there. I was just going to address that too. So yeah, let me
And
go ahead.
then my next question was, is there a way that when I purchased my machine back in 2018, I purchased it during the time frame where they were giving away the free laser bit to it. If you purchased it and showed them your receipt, they gave me the laser bit.
Yeah.
I just have no clue how to attach it. Do I have to take my router out? Because I'm also using a DeWalt router. Do I have to take that out in order to attach the laser?
No, actually, the laser just chucks right up inside your router.
Well, I don't know if I'm missing a part or something. Is
Oh.
there a way somebody can actually show me, or is there a video I can watch to show me how to attach my laser?
I'll check into that. I think, the answer to your question, I think, is generally yes. I think there is a video out there that shows the basic setup of it. Also, there is a new manual they published a year ago that's, I think, an improvement over the previous setup, but I'm not 100% sure on that, but I could look at that. But yeah, your laser attachment, if it is in fact a laser attachment.
It is.
Okay. Should have a shaft coming off the top, like a router bit shaft that you would slip into your collet of your router.
I need to look at it again. I put it
Yeah.
up because I got so agitated.
Okay,
So,
That's exactly how it works. I used a
yeah,
laser, and it does go right up either into your spindle or into your router. And
okay.
but the other thing is it focuses almost about a paper's width over. So you're not going to see anything it's cutting. All you'll see is pretty much a blue light. If you have it correctly focused, it's almost touching the wood.
Okay.
Yeah, you
They'll-
have to wear glasses too.
Yeah, they did
Absolutely.
provide me with the glasses within the unit itself. They provided me with those. They're orange. But
Yeah.
again, I need to know how to attach it before I use it.
well,
I
let
hear
me,
ya. I spend a lot of time trying to learn how to get the thing started.
I also got a touch plate, and that's not working either.
well, that, if that's not working, then that would be a good one to contact tech support over, because maybe there's a faulty wire or something if it's not working correctly.
Okay,
Yeah,
because I've contacted them recently. I guess I didn't have the updated software for my machine to run. So basically, mine's kind of been a paperweight for almost 3 years because I got agitated.
ouch.
Yeah.
Well, I sat in on a meeting today with them because I had been asking some questions the last year about, well, several things you're talking about, because, well, there's so much technology involved here. And like technology, as we all know, there can be little glitches that turn things into a paperweight.
Right.
And one of them with the laser, I mentioned earlier, is that they are currently working with Vectric to come out with a laser app that works with their tool and provides, let's just say, a better experience for the user, which is obviously what I was looking at. I said, hey, this thing is really cumbersome to use. Let's find a way to make it better. So they worked internally and with Vectric, and they're supposed to be coming out with something. I'm hoping it'll be this fall. I've been waiting for a couple of months to hear about it, and they are working on it.
Okay.
But that's coming forward. The touch plate thing is the kind of thing, it could simply be a wire.
Okay.
And we'll
I
find.
don't have an issue with contacting them. It's just a simple fact. When I tried to run it before, I guess the software that I had was not the correct software, but then there was also nobody to help to let me know until I went to New Wave and they told me the website to go to, download it on my laptop as well as my machine.
And is that
So
software?
hopefully it'll work.
Yeah.
Huh?
You're talking, the software you downloaded, was that for the laser?
It was for the actual machine. It's the one where you register your machine and you put
Got
in
it.
a control number and everything, and it actually runs your pathways, because what I was using wasn't even running my pathways. It would start cutting out shapes and then it would cut through the shape, or it would rise up on the Z axis and cut in the air as if it was touching on the actual material itself.
Got it.
So hopefully at the end of all of this, I'll be able to actually run a simple square.
So yeah, you said you have an HD4, correct?
Yes, extended bed HD4.
Got it.
Mhm.
Got it. Yeah, what I was going to just follow up with is one of the meetings I was in today. Part of what I do for Next Wave is I do some technical advising, which is basically when I see things that are happening out in the field or with other machines or things that I've experienced that look good in a machine, I take it to them and say, hey, can you make that change in your machine and, improve your machine to better serve the kind of work that we're doing with woodworking. And so they're pretty responsive, but it takes a while to get it done. And one of the latest ones now has to do with that whole registration, something called firmware, which is a software that gets loaded up to the machine itself. And it's true of many devices, computers, cell phones, all these things have firmware that needs to be updated. And we're all familiar with that, but it always causes a headache if it's not super automatic. Anyway, they're currently in the process of updating the process. It looks very promising. And once it's updated, for those of you who have gone out to Vectric and got your software, and if you've created, I'm assuming you've created a user account out at Vectric,
Mm-hmm.
And you know that you go out to Vectric now and download your software. You could download
Yeah.
your different
I just
3D
upgraded
files.
to 11 yesterday.
Yeah, so you can download lots of stuff off your account at Vectric. Well, NextWave is in the process of launching a user account, which will also have different services available, not only for registering your tool and getting your passwords to run your tool, but things like software updates, some free software, some videos. It's all developing. And this is something also I've been pushing them on. I said, let it be kind of a candy store for the user that they could just freely go in there and get this stuff and have access so they can self-serve themselves. It also becomes a place then for tech support to easily point you to suggest go find that information. So
Right. It'll be a lot easier for us.
it's still a bit of a work in progress, but I know what I saw today was a good step forward. So maybe even by next week and hopefully by the last class, they'll have that updated and I'll pass along some of that information to everybody too, because many of you will benefit from that. So,
Okay. Thank you.
all right, well, let's get rolling for tonight. Greg, do you have a question? I see your hand up.
I just want to make a quick comment on the spindle
Yes.
versus the router. When I got my machine, the spindle wasn't available. I had to wait a couple weeks. So I did run it with the Porter cable router. And two things I noticed. The spindle doesn't blow the sawdust all over the place because it doesn't have a fan on it, okay? The second thing is the spindle is much, much quieter than a router. So those are the two observations I had, spindle versus router.
Those are good points, and I've heard that from other customers too. The lack of a fan does make it less of a tornado, and certainly the noise, especially where router CNCs run so long, unless you have a separate room or have it enclosed, the router can be quite aggravating over time, and that does have it definitely is a value that way, and people often buy it for that reason. So thank you. Okay, I'm going to go dark here for a minute, and then I'm going to bring up another screen. And we'll get going tonight. Okay, once again, welcome to class 2. This evening's class is focusing on a variety of new tools. Where last week we looked at some drawing tools, we're going to be looking at some different kinds of editing and layout tools tonight. Once again, well, here's the topics for tonight. We're going to be looking at some image search tips because images are very common to be used in creating drawings like we did last time. We're going to take a quick look at the bitmap tracing review and the spaceship and a couple of things there. And then these are some of the other tools we're looking at: the array copy, the layer management, text editing, and note editing. So it's quite a bit of information, but I've taken each one of these as a separate topic, and we'll look at those individually. As I mentioned last time, there's a lot to cover in VCarve, and my goal for this class is to give you a good view of some of the essential tools and ways of using them. It's hardly enough time to cover it all or even advance a lot of skill development, but I like to give people a good snapshot and a good look at these different areas. And then, of course, you always have this information as a resource as well. In fact, let me go to the next one here. So these are some handouts for this week. Give you the class video, of course. People often ask about shortcut keys, and VCarve has a long list of shortcuts available. I've created kind of a short list as opposed to the long list for the shortcut keys, and I'll send that out to you as well. The presentation or overview information that we're going to look at here in the next 10 minutes, this slideshow of information, I'm actually going to send you a copy of that, so you'll have a hard copy of all these slides that I'm showing you. And then once we get into the software tonight, I'm going to take each one of those topics and do a live demonstration on each of these topics as well. And then we'll wrap the night up we'll talk a bit about this baking sign, which will apply some of the information we're using tonight. And then also I'll be sending you out a practice project for this baker sign, which is actually two parts. One is the drawing part and one is the toolpath setup. And the toolpath setup goes into more depth of setting up each individual tool. And it'll be a bit of a prep from a terminology standpoint and a workflow standpoint, because then next week we'll be taking a much closer look at toolpaths. And then I have a challenge project that I will send you as well, which is text on a curve or text in a circle, and see how you do with that using some of the tips that we go over tonight. So this is a quick overview of the offset and array layout tools. These are the four we're going to look at. We've already looked a bit at the offset tool, but we'll be looking at it again tonight. You simply you select one vector and then it offsets it by an equal amount going around. We're going to take a closer look at these other three, the circular copy, the copy array, and the copy along vectors. All of these provide design options for when you're doing a project and you have an image or a vector that you want to copy in a certain direction. Layers is a big topic, and we're going to take a look at all the details that you see on the screen here. And as I mentioned, I'll also be sending you a copy of this slide, this presentation right here. So you'll have a hard copy of this you can print out and keep next to you or put it on your computer. A simple way of thinking of layers is that layers are like sheets of transparent paper. In fact, the term layers comes out of the drafting industry, the design industry, when you actually had pieces of paper that you were working on and they were transparent. And they were used in the sense, if you're drawing a house, you'd have the basement on one piece of paper, the first floor on the next piece, second floor on the next piece, and the roof on the fourth piece of paper. And you could look through them all and see how they overlapped each other, or you could pull one out and just look at that alone. Within Vectric, you have light bulbs along one side, which make them visible, and then you can select which layer you want to work on. So that you have total control over, again, much like the paper, you can look at one layer or you can look at all of them. And when you get into more complex designs, they become very useful as a file, kind of a file management or information management system. So I use them not only for overlaying vectors, but I'll have one for some temporary information. I'll have one for reference information, and you'll see how I even use them tonight. The next area we're going to take a look at are text tools. We, of course, did a little bit of work with text already, but we're going to take a closer look at it tonight, and the basic text tools, some other ways of using text and manipulating text. And there's a bit of a mystery in some of these tools that will hopefully take that mystery away tonight and help you take full advantage of these tools. One of the more complex topics within learning VCarve is called node editing. But once you learn the basics, of which this picture represents, and what each of these nodes, which you can think of as a kind of a fence post along the fence, and different colors, different types of nodes, they have different ways of working. We're going to take a look at each of those different types of nodes so that when you get into node editing, which is a very useful way to precisely or creatively manipulate a line or clean up a line, you'll have an idea what you're looking at. There is a bit of a skill involved because there's a bit of an art behind making the curves behave the way you want them to, but at least I think what you'll find after tonight's exercise is that you'll have a clear idea of what each of these do. And so then it's a matter of simply going out and practicing till you see how they interact together. And I mentioned we're going to also take a look at searching for images. This place called Bixabay is one area that I go to. They have a lot of free imagery out there, and some of it's quite good quality, and you just create an account and you download it. And the simple process of that, and you can find it, as you can see here, you can just do a search for it. And they say they have 2.3 million images of free stuff, or a free image that you can use anywhere. And what this represents here is just a couple of settings that if you use Google to do a search, let's say for a US flag. Now, I've departed from Bixby, okay? So that was just a service. Now I'm showing you what is specifically just a simple Google search. So if you haven't experienced it, if you type something in like USA flag, at the top of your Google search, of course, you've got all, which tend to bring up website links. You've got images, shopping, news, and video, and more. Within the image one, you then will have some sub options along here as well. And they give you the option to filter out. And I typically go for large options, black and white, clip art, and I look for something called Creative Commons license, because then there's no copyright, or there are fewer copyright issues to deal with, especially if you plan to use it commercially. Now, if you're using an educational setting or a one-off, then you could probably get away by using something that has copyright on it. But I have heard stories of people that do Mickey Mouse and they take it to a flea market, and Walt Disney has gone after some of those people who have openly copied those images. So you have to be careful about some of that. But there's a lot of free stuff out on the internet that is not copyrighted. So this is one way to access it. The tools menu you see up here will also bring up some of these sub items. So if you don't see these sub items, look for something called tools, and then it will give you these sub menus that you then can select your filtering preferences. Okay, I've jumped back here for a minute to Bixby. That slide was a little out of order. But when you do a search in Bixby, you'll come up with like the US flag. You've got options over here of different sizes. The free download, you can click on that. You do have to have a registered account to download most of this. Something worth looking at along the right side here, there's two types of images typically available. You've got your ping image, which is also like a JPEG. It's a bitmap image. It's a photograph essentially. But then if you see something called graphic or vector graphics, this is typically actually vector lines. And when you download these, they will import straight into VCarve as vector lines. You don't even have to trace them. So there is some huge advantage to that. Now, they don't always come in the cleanest, and sometimes you have to go and clean them up. And that's something we're going to look at next week as well, is how to clean up problem vectors, because tracing a vector or starting out with some clip art is a really easy way to get to a design. But often the results are less than satisfying because the vectors end up being a bit of a mess. So we're going to look how to clean up vectors next week if you do import something like this. Now, one other thing to point out is that the Bixby website is not all free, and you have to be kind of aware of it, because you see right here these images like, wow, I like that heart, or I like that flag. Well, if you look at the little title right here, it says sponsored image from iStock. So iStock is a for-fee image service, and the prices aren't bad. I mean, it depends what you're getting, but you can get stuff for $5 or $15. And then you do get what's called typically royalty free, which means you can use it as many times as you want in a professional setting, and you don't have to cite anybody or pay anybody royalties on it for every time you use it. But it does cost something. So what Bixby does is they have this little sponsored link, and I find myself often clicking on this because it's really nice artwork. But it does cost something, and it takes you over to this iStock website. I have a feeling that iStock either owns this website or they sponsor this link. Somehow there's a partnership. But if you're not opposed to paying a little bit for your artwork, iStock is truly an amazing site of images. You can find very high quality images out there and a much larger selection.
Randy.
Yes.
Quick question. Can you manipulate these images at all?
Well, when you say manipulate,
like turn the flag a little sideways or something?
Well, you can't turn it sideways from a 3D standpoint, but you could obviously rotate it or flip it left to right.
I gotcha. Okay.
once you get into VCarve, let's say if it wasn't let's say if it was the flag, if I wanted to, well, this is a rectangle right now. If I wanted this image to be, square, once I get into VCarve, I can shrink this into whatever, like square
Yeah.
shape, or I make it longer. So that amount of manipulation, but it's not a 3D image that you can rotate it and look at it from different sides.
Okay. Thank you.
Yep. But those are some easy resources. I use both those myself, some free, some paid. And then, like the paid ones, I just keep track in my file. I put it right in with my design file. And I usually even take a copy of my receipt and I stick it in there. And if it's the free ones, I'll copy the page that, I'll do a screen capture of the page. I'll download it. I'll put that into that file, because for me personally, I use a lot of the information in my presentations and also articles that I write for magazines. So I've got to keep track of what I'm using. So if ever anybody comes back to me, or if you're selling a product, let's say on Etsy or on eBay or something like that, you can get called on it. And all you have to say is, hey, here's where I bought it. Here's my license. I'm good to go. Because I could essentially, this flag right here, this wavy flag, I could do a screen capture off that and steal that layout and make a project and sell it on eBay. But technically, I have stolen somebody's image, and technically they could call me on it because they could match up those waves and find out that it was actually a duplicate. For something like US flag, the odds are small, but for something more creative, like whatever this image is or other things, or any of these images in the lower right, becomes a little bit more of a question. So just a little bit of advice there and options you have to deal with custom images. So with that, any other questions about image download at this point? Okay, then I'm going to jump into the next project here. Let's bring this over. So this is the spaceship that I handed out last week as a challenge project, and it's pretty straightforward from a bit mapping standpoint. So I'm just going to jump in, and again, you can either drag the image in, or you could use the bitmap import function in the upper right corner up here. Once you have it imported, you'll notice as you import bitmaps, they automatically import into the bitmap layer. Now, typically, they will import into that layer, but if you have a layer 1, your layer 1 will remain active. So any lines that I draw will be on that. So just be aware that sometimes you saw that happen last time, that I had the bitmap layer active, which is when it's dark and bold. But I want my new lines to go on layer 1. If we take a little look at this, we're going to be talking about layers later, but you'll notice how these little symbols right here, layer 1 looks blank. And that's because if I turn off my bitmap layer, the visibility, there's no information on layer 1, and it's giving me a hint here that there's no information. If I turn on extra layer, see what's on extra layer. There must be, so there's some stuff right down here actually. So that's what's on the extra layer. So we're going to stick with layer 1. We're going to tip the bitmap on, zoom in on that a bit, bring up the trace tool. Again, like I said, I'm just going to put things in the middle here for the first go around, select my bitmap and do a preview. And a quick look at that looks pretty good. So I'm going to apply that and close. Again, now that I'm done with my bitmap, I can go up and turn off the visibility of my bitmap layer. And I just have my lines left. Now, when I click on one of these lines, in this case, everything when I click on one, they all become highlighted and they're all solid pink or magenta. That's because these lines are all grouped. And group means that if I grab one, they all become active and they all move around together. The reason they're grouped is that inside the bitmap tool, down in the lower left here, that checkbox was checked when I created those vectors, and it grouped those vectors. If you uncheck this box, then the vectors will all be created independently. And it just depends on the kind of design that you're dealing with. Now, if you have them grouped, just a little, show you a little something here. If you want to ungroup, I'm going to right click, bringing my local menu, and I can go down to ungroup. And the safest one is this last option, because that's going to ungroup them onto the current active layer. If you have grouped vectors that come from different layers and you ungroup them here, they will go back to their original layers. So that's just kind of an advanced feature. I typically ungroup them to the current layer. And now you notice that when I select 1 or 2, just those layers are highlighted. And that's the difference between grouping and ungrouping. Now I'm going to go ahead and select all those, go back to my local menu and click grouped. And now they're grouped again.
I have a question.
Yes.
So now that you can ungroup those, when it's time to send it to like a vector, you can actually treat those individually different as far as depth. Like say those circles on the ship, like those depths you can treat differently, like as far as like the how far they go and stuff like that. Can you get that custom with it or?
Well, right now, sure. Yeah. I mean, right now where it's grouped, remember we talked about this little square up here. I can stretch this. Everything scales uniform. So it scales together when they're grouped. If I ungroup them, and by the way, the shortcut key for ungroup is U on your keyboard, but it will put them back to the original layer. That's just a little unspoken thing that happens. Anyway, ungroup them. So I think to answer your question, if I want to change the diameter of that one, I can change that one. Is that what you were referring to?
Almost, but that's good to know also. But now when you come to the tool path, now these are different. You come to a tool path, you can select each one of these as like, okay, the middle one has a different depth, different VCarve depth and stuff like that, right?
Right. So if I wanted to actually cut holes in my project for these, I could select just those and I could use like say the profile toolpath and cut those out as a whole.
Okay.
You know, I could cut out the area around their heads, but then their eyes, I could VCarve. So yes, you have independent vectors now and you could toolpath those independently.
Wow. Okay. Cool.
Yep. So with that said, now I'm going to just take a quick look at the top up here just to reinforce something. When I click over here, well, upper right, I see my toolpath tab. And when I touch that tab, it bounces out when I click on that. But when I click back here, it disappears. That's because up at the top up here, you'll see a little thumbtack. And right now it's on auto hide, because it's horizontal. If I click on that thumbtack, the thumbtack becomes vertical. Hopefully you can see that. Shrink this a little bit here. You can now see the thumbtack is vertical and it's locked out. Same thing on the left side. Plus there's this other image here, which is an auto switch. So it automatically switches between the two menus. So that's how those function. So if your menu is not, if it keeps disappearing like that every time you click off it, just click on that thumbtack, it'll lock it out. Right now I'm working on a fairly large monitor, so I'm actually able to have both menus open at the same time. But when I work on my laptop, I will typically only have one visible. Okay, so we've got our vectors here. I already have some toolpaths signed up here and I've renamed them. But the way I would start out is I would select all those vectors. Oh, there's actually one thing I need to do yet. I need to go back to my drawing line. And I need to put an offset around this. So this is a case where I really want these ungrouped because I only want to do the offset, add the offset to the outer one. So I'm going to add the offset, go to the outside. I'm going to go 1/4 of an inch and I'm going to click on select new. and I'm going to say create sharp corners because I do like this sharp corner in here. And I'm going to go offset. And it automatically selected the new one. And I'm going to add another one. So I actually have 3 vectors out here. And so back to my toolpath side, the way I would set this up, and I'm going to start this from scratch, but I would take the VCarve toolpath. I'm going to select everything, but I'm going to go back in and deselect the middle one. And then I'm going to do a flat depth of, let's say, 1/8 of an inch. I need to select my V bit. So I bring up my tool database, select my V bit. I'm going to accept these settings for now. And then also I'm going to add a clearance bit because I've got a lot of area in here that I want to clear out. So I'm going to add what's called a clearance bit. And for that, I'm going to add a 1/4 inch end mill. Again, I'm just going to accept these settings for now. And the purpose of the end mill is that it's going to clear out the extra material before we do the V carving. I'm then going to look down here. What do I want for tool paths? The offset is fine. Climbing conventional, we'll talk a little bit about that next week. I'm just going to put that on conventional. I'm going to add a little ramp. It's always important to add some ramp to a straight bit. And for a 1/4 inch bit, I like to put it anywhere between 1 and 2 inches. And let's just go ahead and I'm going to call.
What's ramp?
Yes, question?
What's ramp?
So the ramp, you can think of it like a boat ramp or a wheelchair ramp. It eases the bit into the material. So it, rather than the bit plunging down like a drill bit straight into the material, it eases it into the material as it starts to cut around the object.
Okay.
And it's a good thing to do to whatever you're using a straight bit. Okay, I'm just going to just call this SSV1. And let's just call that SS Space Ship VCarve. And let's calculate. So if we look at the right side, you can see I have 2 tool paths now. I have one called SS VCarve Clear, and that's the 1/4 inch bit. And then I have the VCarve bit is the VCarve bit itself. In fact, you notice that when I hold the mouse cursor over this name, you actually get a little pop-up that shows you what bit it's referring to. And it shows you how fast you're going and the maximum depth. And so you can quickly take a little look at what it's showing. Okay, I'm looking out here. I'm going to turn off my V bit for now. And this shows me where the straight bit is going to cut. So I'm going to go ahead and preview that. And so that finished up. So the rest of what we see here has to be completed with the V bit, which will go in and it will then do the remainder.
I got a quick question.
Yes.
So I know you have the cut depth, but so let's take when you hit that picture at the Y, so you can see the depth of those circles. How can you determine on those circles how deep that cut is going to go? So that's where I'm kind of lost at. Is like, so it calculated, it created a nice picture. But say you're like, hey, I want these circles to be a little deeper. I want them to be a little more shallower. Can you control that to a magnitude, or is that part of the calculation somewhere? Because I know the cut depth is saying how far it can go, but can you determine those circles being, shallow or deep, specifically to say I want it to go this far?
Right. Hey, can you guys still see my screen?
Yep.
Okay, I'm back. All 3 of my monitors went black. So anyway, I'm back. Yes, I heard your question. And
Mouse, let me see something.
something is, yeah.
Okay.
Okay, I'm going to preview the VCarve. Are you guys still there?
We're still here.
Okay, I tell you
Yep.
what, I'm getting a signal that my
Yeah.
internet is becoming unstable. If I lose you, we'll just have to all sign back in. I apologize. The energy company has been doing some major construction behind our houses here, and I'm concerned that they may have disrupted the connection. So if that happens,
Sure.
we'll bounce back online here as soon as possible.
Okay.
But for now, I'll continue. Okay, so to address I believe what the question was. So right now, you're right. We have a certain depth set here. That depth is actually controlled inside of VCarve. This very first setting up here, which is called flat depth.
Mhm.
So if I put that at 1/8 of an inch, that is what controls that flat depth around the carving.
It'll say that's how far is the maximum it can go, but can you control like if it's less than that or?
Yeah, I mean that I fully control that. So if I want to go, let's say 1/4 of an inch deep, I would recalculate.
Oh, and the circles go deeper.
And then it will and let me reset that preview. And I'm going to go ahead and preview the straight bit. And you can see how it's gone deeper now.
Okay,
And so that's how you control that.
got you. Okay, thanks.
But you can separate them, right, Randy? Like I kind of got part of that, but like you could make the little men, or maybe their eyes a little shallower.
Oh,
than the
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, in fact, let's go ahead and do that. In fact,
Yeah, that's a good question. I like that.
yep. So so right now, I've got this whole thing set up at, let's go back to 1/4. I'll just do an 1/8 of an inch on everything, but I'm going to leave off all of these holes. And I'm going to leave off the outside. And I'm going to do an 1/8 inch just around the little men. Let's reset that and preview that. And do that part. Okay, so we've got that part done. Now here's a little trick that I will mention next week, but it's worth mentioning now also, is that up here in the menu up here, this middle item here is called Duplicate Toolpath. So having created this toolpath setup, I like everything about it. I like the tool, I like the feed rates, I like my ramping, I like all the information there I like. So I'm going to select that. I'm going to click Duplicate. And notice it duplicated both the clearance as well as the VCarve. So just to keep these separate, I'm going to move this one to the bottom. So these two are a pair. And these two are a pair. Now, as you notice, they're both cutting out around the space aliens. But I'm going to use this one and open it up simply by clicking on the icon right here, double clicking. And we see all our settings are identical as well as the vector selection. So now I'm going to go back in and I'm going to select these lines and select all the holes here. And I'm going to remove my flat depth and I'm going to tell it to cut as deep as it wants for these. And all the other settings, I could use the same. I just basically changed the depth up here. And then I've got the different name down here. So I'm going to click calculate. And now when I preview the first one, the 1/4 inch bit, it's going to go to a 1/4 inch, or it's going to go to maximum depth. And now you can see how everything else goes to maximum depth as well. So that's how you're able to select different areas and toolpath them however you prefer.
Thanks.
So hopefully that answers some of the questions that came up. So the last thing we need to do for this is we want to cut this out. And this was kind of the challenge part of it, is that the fact is I don't even really need that vector. All I need are these vectors right here. But how do I cut it out and get that nice bevel? Well, if you study this, and that's where if I go back, the trick is what I brought up earlier, this extra. The simple trick here is that the VCarve does a full VCarve, and then we're going to use a straight bit, and we're going to cut the outside half of that VCarve away to trim out the waste material, leaving a nice bevel around the project. I use this technique on a lot of projects I do. I like adding that little bevel. It softens the project for cutouts like this, toys and things like that. And while you could do that outer shape with a standard V-bit and a profile cut, I just find the offset to be so easy. And remember, if you remember that offset line is a 1/2 inch total. And because my V-bit is a 90 degree, it's going to go exactly a 1/4 inch deep, and half the profile is a 1/4 inch. So a 1/4 inch cutout or a straight bit is going to take off exactly half of that. So for that, then I would select the outer line. I actually could, I would select the outer line, get my profile toolpath. I'm going to want to cut all the way through my material. So I need to set that at least 0.75. I need to go in and select a 1/4 inch end mill. I have my options here. I'm going to cut on the inside of the line. And again, I'm going to add a ramp right here. And for this one, I'm going to let it decide how far it wants. I'm just going to call it a smooth ramp. It'll automatically set the distance that way. And let's go ahead and calculate that. Jumps back to the 3D screen automatically, and there we can see the path. So if I preview that, you can see how it's going to cut the outer bevel away, leaving just the spaceship.
Hey, Randy.
Yes.
I'm having issues with, see, you're using 2 different bits here. I have an HD5, and I guess when you have to change those bits, if you don't get the bit in the cullet the same depth as you did on the previous cut, then you have to re-zero that out every time you change a bit. Then is that right?
That is correct. Every time you change a router bit, you need to redo the Z0. You shouldn't have to do the XY if you didn't turn your machine off, because that'll remain the same. But the Z, yes, that's a requirement.
Okay. Does the touchpad eliminate that?
No, because the touchpad, the Z0 plate or touchpad is used to zero out the Z, the same as doing it manually with a piece of paper.
Okay.
But you are correct in your first comment that you had to get the bit. You have to have that bit exactly the same height. Well, if your V bit is sticking out 3/4 of an inch, if you had a way to perfectly get your straight bit to stick out 3/4 of an inch, you wouldn't have a problem. But because bit lengths vary, the standard practice is just to re-zero it every time.
Yeah, I was hoping there'd be a little trick there.
Unfortunately, the only trick there is to get an automatic tool changer.
Yeah.
You're talking
Okay.
the price. You're talking the price of a good used car.
Yeah,
So,
I know.
But unfortunately, it still is a bit of a manual thing. But that's the requirement.
All right. Thank you.
Hey, Randy,
Yes.
are you going to be talking about how you secure the pieces to your board?
Sure. There's a couple things we could talk about this one right here. In fact, it's part of what I was going to lead into. It's a good question. If I click in this illustration on the waste material, it disappears. And I just have that part. So that's just a little tip. But obviously, if I go back and reset this preview and I highlight those 4 tool paths to make them all visible, and then go back up here and say preview visible, it'll preview all 4 of them. And I missed one, so let's go get this one right here. this is going to fall out of the work when you're cutting it. So you have to do what's called add tabs. This is one thing in the setup you have to do. And then when you get to the machine, you have to do another step, which I'll mention as well. But first of all, I'm going to go back into this profile toolpath, and there's something called adding tabs. So tabs are a connection that adds a little tab between the waste and the project. And some of you have probably used these. Right now, I have this set up for a 1/2 inch in length and an 1/8 inch in width. I will often go half that thickness, but I like to recommend people start a little generous. You can always go back and make them thinner later. The one thing you don't want is to have that break out while you're cutting. There's also worth pointing out that there's two types of tabs. One is what I call a brick. It's a standard shape. It's just a square rectangle. And then the other one is a 3D tab, which is more like a speed bump. The advantage of a 3D tab is the machine only slightly slows down when it comes around that tab. It's kind of like a speed bump. It slows it down, but it doesn't stop it. Where with a standard tab, which is more like a brick or a curb, it actually, the machine has to stop. The router bed has to go straight up, go straight over, stop, and go straight down again. And every time it goes straight up and straight down, it will leave what's called a dwell mark on the edge of the product. And sometimes that's a problem if the edge of your material is finished. So that's where the 3D tab leaves less of a mark along the edge of the product. And so I tend to use the 3D tab most of the time. Once you select your settings here, you check the box, set your size, and the 3D tab. Now, the one thing to be aware of is that the 3D tab has half the material of a square tab, so it is also only half as strong. So again, it depends on the kind of material that you're setting up. If I was using solid wood, I probably could get away with this, but I might increase the length of that to 3/4 of an inch or even an inch. I'm going to change it to an inch just to make it really obvious this time. And I'm going to change this to 1/4 of an inch just so you can really see what they look like. You then go into Edit tab. And in Edit tab, you then go back to your main drawing, and you actually have to click on the line. So you can see, you have some options in the upper right here to add them automatically. But I usually go back in and just click one. You can see the little yellow T up there. And I'll click one at the bottom and one over here. And 4 are probably good here. Couple places you want to avoid putting tabs. Inside corners, it's hard to clean them up. And also maybe over in this corner where I'm really close to the edge of the material, I may not, sometimes I'm so close to the edge of the material, the tab doesn't do any good. So I tend to put them, space them out on outside curves where it's easy to clean them up. Once I have those in, I go back to my main file and I can click calculate. Now let's reset this. And if I turn this, you can actually see the 3D tab on the corners here as well as at the top. So let's go ahead and set up and preview all of our toolpaths again. And there you can see the 3D tabs. So that'll hold it in place. To get rid of these, I sometimes will take it to the bandsaw. Sometimes I'll use a utility knife to cut them off if they're small. Sometimes I'll use a chisel. It just depends on what kind of wood I'm dealing with. And you have to be careful when you break them off that they don't break away part of your project. So like I said, I have a little dovetail saw or a little fret saw sometimes that I'll get in there to saw them off so I don't chip out the grain. When I take this board to the machine, there's a couple of ways to fasten it down. I have a MDF spoil board. I actually have 2 layers on my machine. I have a piece of plywood on the bottom, and then I glued a piece of MDF to the top of that. So I've got 1.5 inches thick almost of material. So a project like this, I will often just put a screw, probably this is pretty small, put one screw in the upper left and one in the lower right, screw that down to my MDF board, and I'm good to go. Another option that I also use often is I actually use hot melt glue. If I don't want to put screws in for some reason, or if the project doesn't lend itself to putting screws in. If I'm doing like a bowl, like a square bowl, and there's no place to put a screw, I will sometimes put hot melt glue, a couple of 1 or 2 inch tabs along the corners or along the edges here. And then when I'm done, I'll use a utility knife or a chisel. I'll just pry the board off. It's actually surprising how well the hot melt glue holds. One other way of holding something down, I do some projects where the entire board is my finished board. So let's say it's a sign board, and I'm actually going to be, for various reasons, I can't put hot melt glue actually on the edge, and I actually want to screw it down. So I'll actually take, I don't know if I can show you, but what I'll do is I'll actually take a little piece of wood like this, that's maybe just a piece of 3/4 inch plywood, and I'll actually hot melt that 3/4 inch plywood to my stock, and then I'll screw that little piece 3/4 inch plywood to my deck. And there's been times that I've done that. I'm very pragmatic when it comes to what's called hold down, how to hold the work down. There's a dozen ways you can do it or more. And I like to be simple. I like it to be fast, but most importantly, I want it to be secure. And I don't want to hit it with my tool. So those are kind of the cardinal rules. You want it to be secure, and you don't want to hit it with your tool, especially if there's a metal item in it. So those are just a couple of ways of holding it down, but there are many others that you'll see that people use as well. Any other questions about the spaceship before we move on?
Hey, Randy,
Yes.
I've started using blue painter's tape with CA glue, and that seems to hold everything pretty good, and it cleans up real easy.
Excellent idea. Yeah. So you use painter's tape on your machine, and then you put painter's tape on the back of your project, and you put super glue between them.
Correct. The thick supers glue on one tape and accelerant on the other one. You stick it down and it stays there, and then comes right off your spoil board without hurting the board.
Oh, wait. So hold on just a second so I can understand. So you put the tape on first, and then you put the glue on top of that, and then you put the wood on top of that layout?
No,
Okay. Go.
I put tape on the spoil board,
Right.
then I put tape on the back of the project.
Oh, okay. Okay. Like a sandwich, and you sandwich the glue in between the tape.
Right. And
Nice.
you stick it down, and even there, when you have areas with pieces that are going to come out, that'll break loose, the painter's tape will hold those in place so they don't move around once you cut them free.
Good idea. Okay.
Yeah. So in a project like this, you could do away with the tabs because the spaceship's not going to fly away.
And Randy, can you do me a favor? Can you hit close on your preview paths? I wanted to see the tool paths again. I'm sorry. I wanted to see the part where you did the cutout, that tool path.
You want me to open up the tool path?
Yeah, on the cutout.
Okay. This is the cutout tool path.
Okay. And you added ramps, you did smooth distance was that already down there under the ramp section already?
No. So just like these check boxes are optional. So I added a ramp to the tool path, and then I selected the smooth, which is for most cutout work like that, that's probably the most common.
Okay. And check ramps. So for zigzag and spiral, for adding ramps to your tool path, what's the purpose of those?
Well, smooth, as you can see, basically, well, here, let's see. Okay, so it's going to go 4 inches is how long it's actually going to go, or
Right.
you could do it at a 20-degree angle. So the smooth one is going to use the settings down here. And actually 4 inches is probably more than I need, but it's so quick, I never really worry about whatever the setting is there. So, but as you
Okay.
can look at the picture, it actually just is, it's like a continuous ramp. Now, zigzag goes back and forth. And I've used these ramps for, since I've been with Metric, which has been since, 10 years or more. Sometimes the smooth will default to ramping because there's something built in the software that prevents it from ramping too deeply too quickly. So like if I had it set at an angle and I said, do that at what, a 1 degree or something like that, it would be like a nosedive or an 89 degree ramp, whichever of those creates a nosedive straight into the wood. It probably would tend to do a zigzag anyway. You'll find, simply put, that if you use somewhere between 1 and 2 inches for a 1/4 inch bit and to use a smooth ramp, anytime you do a cutout or on a project like that, it'll work just fine.
Okay.
Zigzag, honestly, I've only once or twice selected that. It's possible that in some situations where, let's say your ramp is going around a corner and you want to get the ramping done before you go around that corner, there may be a reason to do the zigzagging, but it's a very rare one that I use that. Maybe some people do, but I haven't found a use for it. The spiral is an interesting one. Does anybody out there use the zigzag for a particular reason?
No, I was just, and you can finish this topic. I'm sorry. I just wanted to know why you would start a start depth at a 1/2 inch or something.
Oh, well, okay.
But you can finish this topic.
I
I'm
will.
sorry. I didn't mean to interrupt.
That was a good question. No, I'll go back to that. So a spiral one goes all the way around before it reaches full depth. It takes the entire circumference of the object before it reaches full depth. And then it actually does a second pass to remove the ramping part of it. This is my favorite path when I work on some industrial machines, which their controllers are faster. And what it does when I'm cutting out holes, it actually corkscrews the bit down in the hole, and it's very quick. It's almost like I said, it's like a corkscrew. Unfortunately, on some of the smaller machines, this spiral, and right now, this is one of the things I'm trying to advise Next Wave on, is to try and change their coding, because right now the spiral is very slow. And so I don't recommend people use it. The smooth works just fine on cutting out holes. This is a very specific application where you cut out a hole. I like to use either the smooth or the spiral, but that's, you can see from the picture the difference. But for most of your work, most general work, the smooth is going to be fine. If you really want to ease into the work, the spiral is one option. So I don't want to confuse you on these by going into too much detail, but that is the difference.
Okay, thank you.
You can experiment with them, watch how they act, and you'll eventually have a preference. Say, for this kind of work, I might like this one. You can control the length here and stuff like that. So the question came about start depth and cut depth. So start depth is set at 0, right now, and that's actually the top of my material. That's where I want the cutting to start. And the cut depth is the thickness of my material. So that's what those two settings at the top represent. There are times, like, see this 1/8 inch depth of cut in here? If for some reason I wanted to cut on that surface, I would set a start depth of an 1/8 inch so it would actually cut on top of that surface.
Oh, okay. Okay.
And that's really applicable if VCarving. If I wanted to go in and put the names of these aliens here,
I gotcha.
I would do VCarving and I would do a start depth of an 1/8 of an inch.
Okay. Thank you.
All right. Well, I think that wraps it up on the spaceship one. So let's take a look at what's up next. All right, I'm back. Well, I checking out a couple things here. So something a little on a personal note here. It's official. It's a girl. My my daughter just had a baby about 3 hours ago. So
Congratulations.
yeah,
Congratulations.
Hey, congratulations, Grandpa.
yeah.
Uh-huh.
Well, it's actually grandbaby number 5, and it's like in 3 years. And those of you who have grandkids, oh my gosh, when it starts, it just keeps going. It seems like. But
But it's
yeah.
very enjoyable.
Oh well,
So much fun.
I actually raced through rush hour traffic to get back to my office this afternoon because we got the call this morning about 8:30, and we were out there this weekend practicing bedtime with the 2 little ones that they already have. And so I jumped. My wife, meanwhile, sings at a chorus that she absolutely couldn't get out of a gig she was at today. So I had the privilege of having grandkid duty today, and then we tag teamed about 4 o'clock, and I rushed back to my office for tonight's class. So anyway, it's official. It's exciting. So
Everybody's healthy.
everybody's healthy. Yeah, I tell you,
Great.
this is her 3rd one, and the first 2 are pretty rough. And this one, she was out walking through the field 2 days ago. I said, she looked so good for a couple weeks away. Well,
That's
she
great.
came a couple weeks early, so that was part of the surprise too. But everybody's healthy, so we're all happy. It's great.
Well, that's the most
Great.
important part.
Yes, it is. It is. But it was kind of fun because the 2 little ones that they have are 2 and 4, and they're pretty clinging to mom, of course. And when mom and dad left, oh my gosh, did they, start crying? But within a half hour, they were clinging to my legs, so it all worked out. So, all right.
Very cute. Thanks for sharing.
Yeah, sure thing. Okay, well, so next up, like I said, I want to look at some of the creative tools for manipulating imagery, and the offset and array tools are some of my favorite. You can see many examples up here of what you can do, starting out with just a couple simple designs and where you can go with them. So what I want to do is walk through a couple of examples to show you, much like we looked at the drawing tools, which they all have characteristics which overlap. And when you kind of understand the terminology and the characteristics, you're able to use them more effectively. So I'm going to zoom in here on this star, and let's go here. So at the top of your screen, just a little tip here again, you see me clicking on these magnifying glasses. And if I haven't mentioned it before, they each have a different function. This middle one zooms out to everything that's on your screen, which I just did. The third one zooms in to the current work area like that. Or if you have something selected, it will zoom into the selected object like that. And so then you can go back and I can deselect that, click on the third one, and it'll zoom out just to the work area. The first one is a selection screen. If I just want to look at a certain part of it, like that corner of the star, when I let go, it zooms into that part of the star. So I will often use that to just very quickly zoom in and out of the work area or a given object. So you'll see me using some of those tools tonight as well. So first up, just use the scroll wheel and zoom out. If we look at the offset tools, the offset vector, we've used that. So hopefully you see the basics of how to use that. Next, we're going to look at the copy array, which, as you can see, it's basically a grid work that it creates, rows and columns. So we go into the star. I'm going to select it over here on the left. This top item up here, it looks like this is the XY size of my selected object. Now, these look like edit boxes, but actually you can't change anything. If I want to change that to a 2, it just takes nothing. So you can't overwrite those. That is the size of my star, so you can't do anything up there. However, I can decide how many rows and how many columns I want. And then you've got 2 options for spacing. One is the gap, which, as the picture shows, that is the space between the objects. Offset is basically from one edge to the other, or you can also think of offset as center to center. So first of all, I'm going to take the gap and leave it at a 1/2 inch, which means I should get 4 rows and 4 columns of stars with a 1/2 inch gap between them. Click copy. Oh, before I click copy, you see this group option here? I also can do that, just like we had with the other tool for the tracing. I can copy these and they'll automatically be grouped. And so there they are. So the thing to notice is that it will grow to the left and to the right, or to the top and to the right from where the original was. And there I have my 4 rows. Hit the Control Z on my keyboard and I can undo that. And I might, for better practice, might want to move that down to the corner and click it again. And a little better centering. Now, if I were to switch over to the offset and not change any settings, I'm going to get a 1/2 inch offset from this lower left corner to where the next star starts. And as you'll notice, they're going to overlap. And there probably aren't a lot of situations where you'll want to do that, but there are some. You know, if you're doing maybe scales on a fish or something like that, or some sort of texturing, you may get to that point and then you may end up going in and clipping out some of those lines. But for this particular setting, it's not all that useful, but I can get a similar setting as I had before by putting in, let's say, a 1 and a 1. And now I have, again, I'm still a little bit close. So I'll take and I'll up that even a little further to 1.5 and 1.5. So if it was important that the center of my object, that measurement was critical, if that was the important setting versus the space between them, then you would use the offset. If the space between them is important, then you use the gap. And so again, you could create big arrays of that. What's kind of fun, once you have that array, again, I can use my align tools. We've talked a little bit about those, but if I align it to the middle, I can then take and rotate it, or I can scale it. If I grab the one handle, or I can rotate it. And I can go back and center it again. There are tools as well up here in the edit transform window. We haven't talked about all of these, but there's actually some up here that actually allow you to rotate it to a precise amount. So lots of ways to manipulate a given design once you start working with it. So let's go back to that. Any questions on the array copy tool?
Yeah, I have a question. Can you hear me? Yeah, so please tell me it would be awesome if you were to be able to like do the top left star and it replicate on the rest of them. Is that something that's like, say you were doing like I have a big bed, extended bed. So say I was gonna do something with coasters and I want them all to have the same design within them. Would I have to just keep doing it in each star, for example, or can I type in a letter?
Oh, yeah, sure. So let's take this star. I think I understand what you made here. Let's undo that. Let's make this star.
Or design it wants to replicate it.
Yeah. So if I wanted to, let's say, put a letter or a signet or something in this. And again, with line tools, these align tools are showing here because inside the align tool, which is right here, there's a checkbox at the bottom that says show common tools on drawing tab. And that's usually how I have my system set up. And since I know that what these different ones do, the ones in white will align, just a little departure on what this is about. The ones in white will align the selected object to the white area. So if I want to select the star and I want to align it to the middle of my work area, I would select this first one. I can then select that one and do the same thing with, and it puts it in the middle. However, I can also align these two objects to each other by using the ones that are in gray up here. So if I wanted to do the star in the middle of the star word in the middle of the shape, right where it's at, I would select the star, select the shape, select this one below it, and then it aligns it down here. So these align tools are very powerful, and each of them have a symbol. The main tool gives more explanation about what they do. Just take and practice with a couple simple objects and you'll come to understand what they do, and they're very powerful. Now, I think if I have this design, I can do the same offset with all of those like that, or let's go back and do a gap in between and do a 0.5 inch gap in between all those.
Oh, nice.
Now, does that address the question you were asking about your 520?
It sure does. So you pretty much design
One.
the one, not necessarily design all of them.
Yep.
I get it. Okay, yeah. So perfect.
And
Yes.
there are also some tricks that if you like, if I set up tabs on the star rate, the first star, if I do my tool paths for this first star, and then maybe I'll just do a quick example here. I'm going to take VCarve here, and I'm going to call that star VCarve, VC for VCarve. And so we've got that star. I'm now going to do a simple cutout of that star. And 1/4 inch bit works for me. I'm going to go to the outside. I want to add some tabs so they don't fall out. It's a small shape, so I'm going to just, for this one, I'm going to add a small solid tab, edit the tabs, go in here and put some tabs in here. Calculate that, preview that, and there's my star. Now, what's kind of interesting about this is if I select those and now do the array, let me make one other change here. Move this stuff down. I'm going to go ahead and increase the size of my project so that I don't run off it.
Hold on, what was that you did? I've been going to the right side to do increase. I've been trying to find that, like on the right side.
Well, you could do the increased size. There's two places you can change the size of your material. You could do this left up here.
Uh-huh.
This is basically the same job setup you see when you start a new project.
Yeah.
And you can edit it in there. Or you could also edit it up here. You could change.
Okay, so
well,
that didn't let you do the height and the width. That's where I got stuck at. I couldn't do the height and width adjustments. Or can
Yeah,
you?
this is actually a change. They used to be able to do it in here.
Okay,
It's the new version 11. So yeah, so you do it on the other side.
perfect. I see now. Thanks.
So if I select this and now do my copy array, they're all grouped, and I honestly haven't experimented with this kind of setup in version 11 yet. So I'm going to see what happens when they're no longer selected. My toolpath that I created is no longer good because, well, wait a second, is it? It's showing it here, but my star word is not selected because everything is grouped. So I'm going to, if you can bear with me a minute, I'm going to go back and recopy that. And I'm going to tell that not to group it, copy it. Now, it's, well, it may still, it may or may not have worked. But the important thing now is, remember last week I was talking about selecting things. If I want to just select those stars, I could draw a rectangle right there, get those stars selected, the word, hold my shift key down, do another rectangle, and I can select all those. And now I can hit group And now when I select one of them, they're all grouped. I can reapply my toolpath to all of those, calculate, and I have all those. Now I'm going to go back, select that star. Now here's where, again, I'm going to go from the other direction and just touch those stars, and it will select all of those stars. Hold the shift key down, go from the right side, just touch those stars, and I'm going to hit group on those. Let's open up the profile on these, select that group, and here's part of the magic. Notice how the tabs copied over. It's one of the really useful things in copy array is that if you set up your toolpath first, you still have to go back and reselect all your objects like I was doing and recalculate the toolpath, but the tabs are in the same place. So if you're going to use tabs, do it on your original before you do copy array. And that way, when you calculate them, and if you were to run those, they would all be connected like that.
Right.
Now, while we're in this drawing or in this preview, it's worth paying attention. I'll say it again more next week, but what you see in the preview is what you get, and you really want to pay attention to the preview because I can see my tabs holding these in place, but I can also see something else that's going on here. I have got a continual cut line from the edge of my material all the way along the top here. And that's going to probably create potentially a weak piece that could lift up or something. So I may want to add some more tabs in. I may want to move my cut parts over. So that's why when you do the preview, stop for a moment and say, is this really how I want it to cut on my machine? And if it's not, go back and make some changes. Okay, so that covers the basic copy array. We'll take and move those aside. The circular array has a very similar function. Let me I'll just create a new star up here. And get the circular array tool. Again, you'll notice that at the top, you have some sizes that represent the part itself. You then have what's called rotational center. Now, rotational center, in this case, refers to where the middle of the star is. I can change that, but for starters, I would advise don't, because I'll show you a little bit how I can move that around. Here would be an easy way to demonstrate that. I'm going to center that up here in the middle of my material. I'm also going to make a change. Oh, actually, I'm going to keep that, go back to here. Now, notice how the rotational center is at 12 and 12. That's because I have a 24-inch piece of material and my datum XY is in the lower left. So I'm 12 inches over and 12 inches up, and that's the middle of my star. So that's where it's going to rotate. Now, how many copies? I want to, rotating the copies means it's going to rotate it partially. We'll leave that on for now. I want 12 copies. I want total angle 360. That's going to give me a full circle. So let me just go ahead and copy this. You'll see what it looks like. It's like, oh, yeah, it copied it 12 times and it used the middle of the stars to copy. So that's actually not what I want. So you're going to find yourself running into that. And here's how you fix that. Let's take and move the star down towards the middle of the bottom here. But for the rotational center, I want to rotate my copies around the middle of my material. So I do want both of these up here to be 12 and 12. Now notice on the picture or on the work area, now you see the rotational center actually, now that I've typed something in, it actually reveals itself. And I can actually grab that and move it around if I want to move it around. But for this case, like I said, I want it to be exactly 12 and 12. Now, when I set up my number of copies, and I'm going to rotate 360 degrees around that center point, and I copy, it automatically places them in a nice circle. Now you can see how each of those stars is rotating based on that middle centerpiece. If I uncheck that little option of rotate copies, it keeps them vertical, which may be desirable. So the settings in here are all pretty simple that way. If the other option you have rather than total angle, if I just wanted to go 180 degrees, I could do that as well. Now notice it did a half a circle and it placed 12 of them. So the number is still the same. It just crammed them into a half a circle, 180 degrees. The other setting you have up here is step angle. So if I wanted those to go every 10 degrees, I could put a star at every 10 degrees until 12 stars. That'd be 120 degrees that it's going to rotate these. And didn't quite do what I expected. Yeah, it did actually. Yeah, that's 120 degrees because 90 degrees would be a quarter of this. So that's 120 degrees. And so there's just different ways. Once again, they're overlapping. I don't like that. So I'm going to increase that to 20-degree separation. And it gets me closer. Again, it all depends on what your application is, what you're trying to create. But you have a lot of different little subtle controls there. The best way to understand these, again, is just go take a simple shape, start clicking on these and practice with them and see what the effect is. Any questions on the circular copy array? You can start to see some similarities again between the spacing and the, the rotation, different things you have to be concerned about for the design to work out. Again, with a shape like a star, I've actually got a situation here where they're almost touching, probably too close. Here they're nicely distanced and they're touching. It's just because of the shape. They may even be overlapping.
Randy, what about text and rotating it around?
So if a text, well, okay, so if you wanted to do text on a circle, we're going to get to that. That's a different topic. This is not the tool to use for that. So I'll demonstrate that later. If you had a single, I mean, you could, let's just take a single T, you could do something like with that said, I mean, you could do something like this and it'll treat it just like the star. If I put it out here, and if you were doing simply for purposes of decoration, let's get this set up correctly. So there you got, kind of like you're doing a clock. You could do something like that, but it's all the same text. If there was a reason to do that, yes, you could use that. But if I had a word here, like the word star, it's going to just rotate it, or it's going to do it all the same around. Now, for creative purposes, again, you could rotate that. You could leave it horizontal. But if you're really trying to place text on a curve, that's a whole different tool. And like I said, I'll get into that a little bit later. So those are probably the two most useful arrays. The other one, which is demonstrated down here, is where you have a line that you follow. So if I actually copied this one, let's just steal this and bring it up here. And I'm going to ungroup that. And let's take some of those stars and get rid of those. This is the third one over here. And there are times if you want to precisely place something along a line, for instance, and if I want to take that star, if you notice the top here, it says select the object to copy, followed by the one or more vectors you want it to follow. So I'm going to select the star, hold the shift key down and select the line. And in this case, I want to have an inch between the stars. And that's what I want. I just want to put as many stars as I can on that line. And they're an inch apart. If I wanted a precise number of stars in that line, like just 6 stars on that line, I could select that option and would space out 6 stars.
What would force even spacing? Why would you not force even spacing?
Well, if you'll notice in this case, let's go back to it a minute here. Let's take and put that up there, and let's put a big space of, say, 6 inches. And let's copy those. So that's forced even spacing. And what you'll notice is the star ends up at the end and at the beginning. And it may or may not be 6 inches between them. But you've got a star exactly at the beginning and
I gotcha.
exactly at the end.
Okay, thank you.
If I don't do forced spacing, you'll end up with an odd remnant at the end, a tail. So that's the
I see.
effect. But
Okay.
my stars are exactly 6 inches apart.
Thanks.
Yep. Any other questions about that? Again, you'll have these illustrations in the handout that I'm sending you. And from there, go into the tools a little bit, play around a little bit, and you'll discover some of how they work. Now, when you're first starting out with real basic designs, you may not find a use for these, but eventually when you start getting creative and doing some of your own designs, you're like, wow, that it really becomes very useful. And I find myself using them pretty often, actually. Okay, so next let's hop in to the topic on layers, which is actually one of my favorite areas. In some ways, it's not very creative, but it gives you an amazing amount of control when you start getting a lot of designs on your area, a lot of material, a lot of information. So starting a little closer look at this, starting at the top up here, the bitmap layer is automatically created when you import a bitmap. So it just automatically gets labeled, and you'll see that it pop in automatically when you do a bitmap layer. Layer 2 is bold, as you can see right here. And the definition of bold is that it's the active layer. What's important to know there is that the active layer is the one where all your drawings are going to go to. So if you start dealing with a lot of layers, you want to make sure if you're designing your roof that you have the roof layer designed, or your roof layer will end up on your basement layer and you'll have potentially a mess that you have to clean up. There's ways to get out of it, but that's the common error, is you end up drawing stuff on the wrong layer based on what your plan was. These little icons on the right, when you right click, or maybe even it's just click on them, let's go to the layers menu, which is right over here. And if I just left click, just a standard click, it brings up the local menu. And what's in the local menu is activate is the same as making the layer active. Show, underneath show, if we look at this up here, you can have show this, show only this, show all but this. You've got ways of selecting, and it'll automatically turn off the other layers. So if you want to automatically turn everything off but one, or if you want to turn everything on but one, you can have this option. Same thing with hide, it's basically the opposite. You can hide this or hide all. Lock, which I actually have highlighted right here. When you lock a layer, you'll notice that layer 1 is locked. So if I go over here to layer 1, I try to select it, it won't select. I can't move it. I can't do anything with it because it's locked. So that allows you to, once you get to information the way you want it, you don't want to move it, you don't want to risk corrupting it, you can lock the layer and it'll stay fixed. The only disadvantage of layer lock is that the snaps don't work to it. So you can't actually, other than just seeing the position of it, it doesn't provide any guidance for laying out your work. I can't snap to one of these corners, for instance. Back in the in our drop down up here, if we look at these again, I've got insert new layer, which is the same as the tab at the very bottom of your screen, which says add new layer. So if I insert a new layer, here I just inserted layer 6 up here, it automatically added that. Of course, delete would delete that layer. So I can delete this or delete all visible. You got several options there. You can delete the empty ones. I'm going to delete the one I just created. And of course, rename is exactly that. It makes it available for renaming it if you want to give it a custom name. And then you've got some options here of merge visible. So anything that's turned on here and is visible, it'll put those all into one layer, which sometimes you want to consolidate things, and that's the usefulness of that. Select layer vectors. So the current active vector, when you do this, all the vectors on that layer will be selected. So if I let's layer 1 is, let's go make layer 2, and let's hit select vectors. You'll notice now how these vectors became active, and my little border line up here happens to be on layer 2 also, so that became active as well. So that's what those do. You can work with those. Again, your layer name is editable. I mentioned earlier that this icon up the middle here says whether it has content. You notice that layer 3 here is empty. There's no content on that layer. And if we look at my little drawing over here, there's nothing here on layer 3 because I have drawn nothing there. Layer 5 is hidden because, as you can see up in the upper left here, the light bulb's turned off. So if I turn the light bulb on, layer 5 now appears, or I can turn it off with the light bulb. So that's how you toggle the visibility of a layer on and off. And when it's hidden, then much like locking, you don't have to worry about modifying it or corrupting it in any way. The line color does exactly that. You'll notice how layer 4 has an icon of red. That makes the lines red. So if you want to use different color ink for different layers, you simply click on that little icon and you get a menu of options, and you even get a bigger menu if you want it. And you can create custom colors as well. So lots of options there for creating different colors for your layers. And then you can very quickly tell them apart. Any questions about the layers menu? It's a little overwhelming when you first get into it, but if you just remember that it's like different transparent pieces of paper, the biggest problem people will typically have, let me go in here and I'm actually going to turn off my bitmap layer so I can hide that information. And I'm going to turn off layer 2 and layer 1, turn off all my layers, and I'm going to add a new layer down here. And I'm going to add a second new layer. So I've added a layer 6 and a layer 7. Turn off layer 7. I'm going to highlight layer 6 and I want to draw on layer 6. So let me go in here to drawings. Let me get my text tool and I'm going to draw a 6. And let's make that large. So just to make it easy to remember, my 6, in my little drop down here, my current active layer is layer 6. So that's where that 6 appears. If I turn that off, the 6 is hidden. Now here's another little way to notice that if I select this object, if you go down to the far lower left, and let me again shrink this up a little bit to make sure it appears on your screen. Notice how it says layer 6 down here. So whatever object is selected, it'll tell you what layer that appears on. It's another quick way to see what layer it appears on, because up here, I may have layer 2 active, but 6 is active here. I want to know where 6 is. If I look down here, it says layer 6. If I click on layer 2, it says layer 2. It tells me what object appears on which layer. But this whole time, my layer 2 is still active up here. So I'm going to go in and I'm going to turn off layer 2. Now notice, this is important, layer 2 up here appears red. And that's because it is still the active layer. So anything I draw is going to appear on layer 2. So you want to watch that if you see a red layer appear, it means you've got your active layer hidden. And what happens with that, I want to go in here and draw a star above my 6. And as soon as I let go of my mouse, bingo, layer 2 suddenly bounces in my face. The reason for that is I drew my star on layer 2 and layer 2 is hidden. And what VCarve does, it automatically makes the hidden layer visible if it happens to be active. So that's because, and now if I turn off layer 2, my star disappears as well. So what I really wanted is I wanted to draw my star on layer 7. So I will make layer 7 active, draw my star on layer 7. Now everything is fine. And if I turn layer 2 back on, that star is still up there. And if I turn layer 7 off, the little star goes away, layer 6 goes away, and layer 2 goes away. So again, I can control all of these. Now, this star that I drew is on layer 2. I know that because if I look at the lower right corner, it shows me layer 2. This is going to happen to you and start using. You get information on the wrong layer or you want to move information to a different layer. And there's a very easy way to do that. By right-clicking on the selected object, you could go down to the bottom and I could either copy it to a different layer. I could copy it to layer 7, and then I have a copy on layer 2 and layer 7, or I can move it to layer 7. Or I could copy or layer it to a whole new layer if I wanted a whole new layer. In this case, I'm going to move it to layer 7, go back up to the top, turn off layer 2, and now I have the design the way that I want it. And if I wanted to move 6 to layer 7, I could go down to the bottom and I can see that 6 currently is on 6. I can move that to layer 7. And now everything, I can turn off all my other layers and everything appears on layer 7. Now, if I wanted to move this star to layer 8, which I don't have, I can create a new layer on the fly by clicking new layer. I could give it a new name if I want. In this case, I want to make that red, and I'm going to make it visible, or I can hide it. I want it to be visible. I also want it to be active. So all new drawings that I do appear on layer 8. So they're giving you lots of quick shortcuts here to get the job done. It's a lot of information to process when you're working with layers, but when you realize how systematic layers works, and again, you can think of it, like I said, transparent pieces of paper. You can think of it different filing folders for filing information, but you can move stuff around, you can rename it, and it becomes very powerful when you start working with lots of information. So now my star is red because it's on layer 8. And layer 8 is also the active layer because I can tell that it's bold. Or if I go to my main layers menu on the left side over here, I can also see that layer 8 is bold and active and red. So now anything I draw, if I draw some more stars, they're all going to be on layer 8 and they're all going to be red. So layers, it's a lot of information, but once you start using it, you'll really like it and you'll find it very useful. Any questions or clarification that you'd like on dealing with layers? Is everybody still there?
Yep.
Yeah, that's just a lot of information in a short amount of time. I don't.
You can almost get an associate's degree doing this.
Right.
Hey, don't panic. That's why I'm sending you the video. That way you get to watch it, listen to my Midwestern accent some more. Or I'll kick in my Swedish accent and say, "Yeah, sure, you betcha." So,
So
all right.
I have a question real quick. I mean, this may be like way back in your beginning of trying to talk about layers. So I apologize to everybody if this is redundant information, but other than for a bitmap, why would you want all those different, like, can you not just carve that? I mean, you said they're very useful. I'm not seeing that, which is my ignorance, but
Oh, on the layers.
yes.
You know what? The useful, when you're starting out, your designs are pretty basic. I can bring up, in fact, next week, I should actually bring it up for this class. I'm going to bring up a layers example that of a project that I did. And I probably had 12 layers, and I'll show you why in that example. It has to do with, and it gets pretty complex, so you better put your helmet on. Because there's this, I do this weird thing, and it isn't, I mean, it's not that it's not kosher. It just makes the Vectrix people head spin, because I did this demonstration for one of their workshops, and I even kind of blew them away because I associate my tool paths with my layers to keep things straight. And it's a real head spinner. But let me just say this, that when your designs start to get more complex, you get too many vectors to deal with in one drawing, and you want to push some aside. And this is what you use layers with. So let's say you were just drawing a simple sign that had, and eventually, and we'll look at this the last episode of last session where we're doing 3D design, where you have basically three types of design work. You have vector design work, 3D design work, and maybe some VCarve design work. And they're kind of three different kinds of design work. And so when you're working on your 3D design work, you don't want to have to deal with your 2D lines. You don't want to have to deal with your VCarve stuff. So you turn that information off. And that's what the purpose of layers serves when your designs start to, it just makes it simpler to work on complex designs.
I see. So you wouldn't necessarily use layers on this design?
No.
Okay.
No, I would not.
That's what I just want to make sure of.
No. But if let me do something here. If for some bizarre reason, I had a design where I had letters on top of designs like this, and I say, I just want to work on my stars, if for no other reason do my toolpath, I might turn everything off, just except for my stars or something.
I see. Okay.
So
it'd mostly be like overlaying letters on designs and things like that, or overlaying other designs on top of designs. That makes sense.
Yeah. When you start finding your vectors overlying each other or getting a whole lot of information on there, that's when to start to look at layers.
I gotcha.
Like I said, it's my favorite topic, so I tend to go into the deep end on it. So
that's fine.
There's another reason, especially if you get into manufacturing. Let's say you're doing coasters and you're putting somebody's name on it. You can just use one drawing and create a layer with all the different names. If you ever get called up to do it again, it's already set. And if you have somebody else who needs a layer, but in the same thing, you can just create a new layer and create new text, and you're done.
Oh, thank you. Yeah.
Very good point. Yeah, so if this was for some reason, and sports memorabilia is often done that way, where they'll have the school logo at the top, and then they'll have a separate layer potentially for every athlete's jersey number that they'll just bring up and carve it independently. So then you've got jersey numbers down one side, maybe their name, like he said. but at the top, you've got one layer that has the logo that consistent. So you can mix and match them together.
Yeah, that's great. That's a great example. Thank you so much.
All right, so next up is the text tool. So much like some of the other tools we've looked at, what this group of tools does, it gives you a way, in this case, how to manipulate text. We looked at the array tools giving you a way to manipulate groups of objects. And again, you see examples here of what you can do when you manipulate text. And I'm going to go through some of these and show you. We'll start out just simply with the first one. To create text is you simply type something in. It's really large over here. That's because my text type over here is set too big. So I'm going to change that. I'll make it to 2 inches. I can also, on the fly, just stretch it like this too. So you can interact with the text on the drawing itself. When the text is active here, I can edit it in this window up here. If it's not active, even though I just created it, you can see it's disappeared. So I can make it active. I can go back in and edit text anytime after I've created. I can reopen this window in the upper right. I can go in and I can change the font if I want. On the fly, I can make it bold. I can make it italics. I can do the alignment. I can do all these different settings. After I've changed it, I can go back and mess with it some more. So that's the basic tool of text. Now, the next one over is similar, but it actually limits the text to a box. So let's take and draw a box right here. And let me see, let me make this shorter. Now I'm going to leave that highlighted. I'm going to go in and select this called Auto Layout Text Tool, which is right up here. And the box has turned to kind of a blue dotted line. You'll have to look close. You may not see it on my screen, but you'll see it on your screen. There's kind of a blue dotted line that it's active. Now, I don't have a text type option down here. What I have is called a bounding box dimension, and that's the rectangle that I just selected. So I'm going to start typing text in here, and notice how I get a nice big T because it's trying to fill up the area. Now I type E, and it still fills it up, but as soon as I hit the next tool, it automatically scales it to fit in that box. And again, what's called the bounding box is the size of my selected rectangle. But that bounding box is actually independent of my rectangle. So I can go in here and give that a different dimension. And you can see how the dotted line now has popped itself out beyond the rectangle. So the rectangle is a temporary reference. Once you've created the text of the bounding box, you now have an independent shape. And you notice how the bounding box follows with the text, not with the rectangle. So again, if I were to change the height and squish the heights down, doesn't have much of an effect. If I try it again, even go smaller, now it suddenly has an effect. And I just undid everything, so I need to go back and do it again. Text. And so once again, you could control the bounding box size. If I exit out of this, and many of the other settings here, by the way, with your text type, bold, alignment, those are all very similar. When I click on this, I can stretch it independently, just like it was regular text. And now if I go back inside the tool, it actually has scaled the bounding box with it. So it's not frozen space. Once you create it in the tool, you can still override it, but realize that it still is within this bounding box size. So a lot of people will use this when they're doing sign work because they need to fit their sign inside a given area. Or if you have a project, a jewelry box cover that you want to make sure the text fits within that jewelry box, this is a quick and easy way to do it. So you can see from this one, the text spacing looks pretty good, but on this one down here, we actually have a problem because we've got some overlap right here. And that'll actually cause a problem when we VCarve because, well, it's overlapping. It doesn't look appropriate. It doesn't look like a nice text. This one is too wide up here. So this text tool right here, text spacing, comes in and provides you some information on that. And so for the text spacing, we use this tool right here. And that then brings up a tool. You can see it on the screen here, and you can see the little arrows pointing towards each other. So when I left mouse click, 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 it brings it close together. If I hold the shift key down, it then brings the spacing out. So I can space that out. And so you can manipulate that till you get it the way you want it to look. It's a useful tool because this little text tool that pops up inside VCarve is kind of a little word processor. It uses fonts, and these are actually not vectors, they're actually fonts. And so I can actually go back in and change that to a different font automatically. But the drawback is it's not super sophisticated, so that the spacing sometimes isn't the way you would like it. So you have to go back and play with the spacing. Let's go back to the original one here and get the spacing set up the way you want it. So that's what the space does. Now, the next one over.
Quick question. With that last text that you did, I saw that it changed the text to go up and down. Why did it do that?
So,
Because the only thing you did was change the text.
well,
like the font.
In my font selection, in yours may or may not have this, but if you use at the beginning, there's the at symbol at the beginning.
Yeah, mine has that.
Yeah, that'll give you vertical text like that.
So that's just automatic.
That's just automatic. So it's kind of unfortunate because I find it, I rarely use that. And if I want to do that, I use the rotational tool or the rotation tool. And so you have to go all the way down to get past that area down to the regular ones down here to go back horizontal.
Okay.
So that's what's happening there. So as I mentioned, this is actually a font. This is actual text. The program's thinking of it as text. It's working with it like text. I can go back and edit it. I can, the new version 11, actually has a spell checker in it. So if I type an extra X in there, you'll notice how it's showing red up here. Wonder if it shows, so there, it shows it red. And it's actually spell checking it. So I can do a spell check and correct it, and I'm good to go. Now, the way I got this little local menu to show up is using large edit. It just pops it out into a local screen and makes it easier to edit. But as I mentioned, this is actual text. That's how the program thinks about it. Now, when we convert it to curves, what we're really doing is converting it to nodes. We are disassembling this text. We're turning it into vector lines, and it will no longer be editable as text. So to do that, I simply click on this convert to curves, and you'll notice how the text lost its solid outline because now each one of these letters are independent. And even if I select all those, go back inside the text tool, it does not recognize it as text. In fact, it deselected it because it no longer is text. It's now simply vector lines. But with these, we can do some interesting things. For one thing, I could go into what's called node edit mode, right click, node edit, and all the nodes come up here. Let me just do one thing before, let me move this text out of the way. I'm just going to get rid of it. Okay, go back into node edit on that. And the N key is the shortcut for that. And I can grab all those nodes. Oh, not that one. Let me grab all those nodes. I'm trying to see if it'll let me grab them as a group. Yep, that's what I want. So I can grab all those. I can stretch that letter down. I can go into this one. I can grab those nodes and I can stretch that guy up like that. I could take that guy and stretch that up a bit. And you can start to mess with the text. And I could pull that down. And you can start create some custom text imagery.
Is
And
that
when
what
I'm
you
done,
did with the drippy water? Is that how you did that? or
that's
was that
exactly how
before?
I did the drippy water. It's how I did the razor, by I just stretched the Z and I grabbed the bottom. See, if you look at the vectors on here, I just grabbed that vector and stretched it way out. The drippy water, it's asking what that warning was, is all the letters were grouped together. So I had to ungroup them before I could do this. So the drippy water one, I drew something down like that. I then, and this ties us into node editing, which we're going to be getting into also. So I go in and I call smooth point, and it turns it into a round point. And then I grab these areas like this, and I make myself a drip.
Wow, that takes a lot of time.
Well, it does. But with it, then you could create very custom designs. And again, this is taking it up another level beyond basic text. But there's sometimes where, like, especially logo creation, like this right here,
Mhm.
it becomes really fun to create a custom logo using that.
It looks cool.
Yeah. You know, or like I did with the lake place up here, I just, you know, I modified those letters by moving them down, or this text. Again, it's kind of, you know, sky's the limit, as they say. But when you get into custom layouts, it kind of becomes fun to play with them that way.
Sure.
Randy, could you
Yes.
create a gadget that would do that?
The
drip?
the water.
I mean, I don't know. I'm
You
just-
know, it's possible.
Okay.
I'm not a gadget creator per se.
Okay.
But you know, gadgets, those of you who know gadgets, are little apps within the program that do special things. It certainly would be an interesting one. Having spoken with Vectric, they do let people create gadgets if they're motivated to do that. They publish a lot of them, but they also tend to look at ones that have broad appeal.
Right.
And you know, this may have some broad appeal, so they may be interested. Then again, they may not. So, but they do provide language information on programming at their website. And if a person is a computer savvy, you can actually create your own gadgets.
Great. Thank you.
So the last thing I want to look at tonight is the text on a curve. And we're going to be looking at that more next week also. But let me take a curve here and just give you a quick example of how this works. I'm going to get rid of this information. Actually, let me just save this. So if we go back again and I go in here and again, I do this text on a curve thing and type some text in there like that. And let's make it a little smaller. I have a curve and I go up underneath text on a curve and it says select a single line of text. That's important. I can't have multiple lines. I select a line of text and then I hold the shift key down and select the object and it automatically pops it to the curve. Now that's the default setting. You'll notice that you play with this. There's some other options. I can scroll up the spacing on it to fill out the curve. I can also put it right on the curve if we look at that. I can put it below the curve, or I could flip it to the other side, which will make it upside down. And I could go above the curve. So now it's upside down on the other side of the curve. So there's lots of ways of manipulating that. And then if I don't want it to go exactly on the curve, I can add, let's go back to the regular way. If I want it above that line a little bit, it's called the offset distance. I can add an offset in there, and now it's a 1/2 inch above the line. Now let's take, and I'm going to take the spacing, make it a little tighter here. Now, if you'll notice, if I take this text and these bottom options here, these are the alignment tools. Again, we talk about alignment in the text tool. This is alignment on the curve. If I go to the left, notice this green node right here. It's more of just a starting point. It's the left side of the text. It's the left side of the curve. If I go to the middle, my alignment point is the middle of the curve, the middle of my text. If I go to the right, it's on the right side. And right now, much like when we did the array of the stars, it's rotating the text to the shape of the curve. But if I wanted my text to be vertical, I could select this option and it would keep it all vertical. So they try to provide you lots of different ways of arranging your text. And again, it'll depend a lot on what design you're after. You know, in this particular application, I like that setting better. I like it in the middle. And that works just fine. Now, you can think when you start getting creative with this, you could actually, you know, if this text said something like, you know, music at sunup or something like that, or at sundown, you could take that text, you could copy it, and I just use Control. So I have a second group of text here. I did Control C, Control V for a paste. Now I've selected my single line of text. I'm going to select my line here. Now it popped it right back to my original one, but notice when I go to over here, other side, now it did a mirror image of it, but if I really wanted it, let's try, see if I can make that go the other direction. And I may have to do something different to get it to go to the other direction. So I've just given myself a little challenge. What I want this to do is act like a reflection. And probably what I would do is go in here and I'm going to push what's called the H key on my keyboard for a horizontal flip. And I just inverted it and flipped it horizontally. So I got, again, a couple of shortcut keystrokes. If you hit H on your keyboard, it'll flip your object in the horizontal direction. If you click V, it'll do it in the vertical direction like that. So a couple of tricks there with working on a curve. So with that said, that kind of wraps it up time-wise tonight. So this is, I've got plenty of information yet to go over on a couple more things. We'll pick this up next week, of course. And next week, I'm going to talk about a couple more tips of text on a curve. I'm also going to talk about the node editing. We talked about that a little bit tonight. I want to take a deeper dive into that. I'll send you some information out in the meantime on that. But we'll take a closer look at node editing next week as well. In the meantime, what I do have coming your way, let me go back to my introduction. So what I'll be sending you, that introduction at the beginning, I'll be sending you those screens of the presentation. You'll get the class video. I'll get together some shortcut keys for you. You heard me talking about those tonight. I'm also going to send you this exercise. And this Baker project exercise used a lot of what we talked about tonight. You can see some fresh goods daily on a curve up here. You can see how we've actually done a join between a couple of objects to create this baker's hat shape. This drawing project, much like the last one, goes into a lot of detail. It should cover pretty much all the clicks you need. Now, it was designed in version 10.5. So those of you who have version 11, you will find a few differences, but I'm going to keep it in version 10.5 for now. because there's a few people that are still using that, but you should still find no problem using it in either version. And then, as I mentioned, the practice project part 2 goes into a lot more detail on tool paths, which again is a major topic of next week. And then the challenge project, if you look at that from this picture here, you can see that I've got inverted text, text in the top. Now, when you do a full circle, I'm going to give you a little hint here. Laying out text on a curve or text in the round on a circle, the text on a curve tool will throw you a little bit of a curveball, and you may or may not figure it out because you have to actually go into node editing to make it work. And so if you want to play around in node editing, there's something called a start point, and the text of a curve on a circle requires the circle start point. Now, because we didn't go over the node editing in detail tonight, that's going to be a little ahead of you on this challenge project. But take a look at it, play around with it. You'll probably have fun or frustration trying to make it work. But I'll show you the actual tips and techniques next week when we get back together. Because it's a little trick that when VCarve first started out, it threw a lot of people a curveball, including myself. But once you know the secret, it's pretty easy.
I have a question.
Yes.
Those YouTube links, I know those are for us trainees, but how long would that be active? So, because I saved in my YouTube links, but how long would that be? Would that be active for?
Those YouTube links are pretty much going to be up there indefinitely.
Okay.
What I'm going to be doing sometime in the future, but for the videos that are up there now, they're going to be up there at least a year.
Okay.
If I do change the location of those, I will send everybody a notice, because just kind of FYI, as I mentioned earlier, I'm putting together a website, and eventually all these videos will be available privately through website links. But for practical purposes, the videos on YouTube, those links you have, they're there for you pretty much indefinitely. Other questions tonight before we close up?
Yeah,
Hey,
Randy.
Rand.
Randy.
Anybody, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Hey, is there a possibility you could take and do something with drawing angles and so forth using straight lines? So we could lay things out using angles?
You'd like a demo on that?
Yeah.
Sure. Let me talk about angle lines too. I'll work that into next week or the last week. We'll talk about that.
Okay, thank you.
Randy.
Yes.
I'm doing a project now that has a wooden coin. It's looks almost a lot like the challenge project, text in a circle.
Okay.
And I've got the texts around this coin in a circle, but I'm having difficulty when I go to toolpath. Go to the toolpath, it won't get every letter. It skips. It skips letters. You'll see them in the drawing, but you don't see them after the toolpath runs its course.
Are those letters, did you use the bitmap tracing to create those letters?
No.
Those letters are text?
Okay.
No, are the letters text? Did you use the text?
Oh, yes. They're text.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Okay, tell you what, and I want to mention this is an open invitation to everybody, actually. If you have personal projects like that you're having problems with, one of the things I offer all of you that are in this class is if you will send me a copy of your VCarve file and define the problem, I'll diagnose it for you. I did mention it last time, but it's one of the benefits I like to offer people take the class is I'm here for available to look at your personal file if you're having a hang up with it. And so, yeah, if you want to send me that file, I'll gladly take a look at it and figure it out for you and let you know.
That would be great. I've been on it for a couple weeks now.
Sometimes the text is so small, the bit you're using can't actually do it. That's happened to me before, where I've been using a 90-degree VCarve bit, but I'm using really tiny print, and I had to switch to a different type of detailing bit because they couldn't drop that VCarve on it without blowing past the lines. I don't know if that's
That's actually,
applicable.
just as a curiosity, how tall is your text?
Well, my coin's 1.5 inches in diameter.
Okay, I think this is the problem. I think he just identified the problem, because when you get that tiny, and if you're using a 90-degree bit,
I don't know. I'm not on that machine right now.
that's
so
okay.
I remember.
Um,
I think I've tried to do it on both a 60 and a 90, so I don't know.
yeah, if your coin's 1.5 inches in diameter, you're going to have a very difficult time V-carving text on that with a 90-degree. Even a 60 could be tricky. I have gone as low as a 30-degree to get some 1/8 inch tall text, but there comes a point to where physically it's just very difficult to carve something that small, especially if you're doing it in wood.
I would think just a 1/16 of an inch down, and you're almost just scratching it.
Well, that's part of the problem. You're only scratching it. And so, I mean, I'll still gladly take a look at your file, but I think if you're at that scale, the one option, about the only option you have is a 60-degree bit, or even go to a 30-degree bit, so that you get the 30-degree bit is very pointed, and so it'll go down deeper into the letter, where the 90-degree doesn't go deep at all.
Sure.
You can also go and change that text into vectors and use like a 30-second thing detail bit. It's really fine, and it'll actually go right around those letters. That's what I had to do.
Like a straight bit. It's like a little end mill.
Yeah, it's almost like a point.
Oh, it
I
is
mean,
a point. Okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
it's just that. Yeah.
What was that called, Jeffrey? What bit?
I don't have it. I'll try and remember to bring it tomorrow. I mean, next week. It's not on the top of my head right now, but I
Okay.
have it inside. It was a Freud bit I used. I'll have to find it.
Okay, that'd be great.
Other questions?
I got another one for you, Randy.
Sure.
Early on in the conversation, you said you had a piece of plywood, and then you glued an MDF board on top on your bench.
Yeah.
On your platform. Is there a reason why you have 2 layers?
So the plywood layer, I have that layer bolted down to my bed with countersunk flathead bolts. Okay.
Mhm.
And then my MDF layer is glued to that. So I could cut all the way through my MDF, not that I need to, but I mean, my MDF is consumable. So every time I surface my MDF, it gets a little bit thinner. And when it gets down to about 1/8 of an inch thick, well, actually, when it gets to about 1/4 of an inch thick, I just glue another piece of MDF on it. That's how I maintain it. And that way I never have to take that piece of plywood off the table to redo my MDF. And also it gives me 1.5 inches, potentially 1.5 inches thickness of screw height. Because I find that if you just put a 1 thickness of MDF on the table, 3/4 of an inch of MDF, it's a little iffy if you could get a screw to hold in that without hitting your table underneath.
Okay. So then you're down into your bench, bench or your platform, and then your MDF finally it gets chewed up, and then you resurface that with a surface bit using your CNC, so it's flat again, and then you just keep going until you're down to the plywood, and then you put another piece of plywood or another piece of MDF on it.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, like I said, I probably would go down to about 1/4 of an inch of MDF, or even, about that, because now I'm down to 1 inch of screw space. And, part of the purpose of having 1.5 inches is to have plenty of screw space. So I'll just glue another piece of MDF on whenever I feel it's necessary, so that my screws don't hit my deck, my metal deck.
So wouldn't that cause your travel to shorten, between your top of your gantry and your
Oh,
deck.
you do lose some Z height. Yes, you
Yeah.
do. And Next Wave's machines have 3 settings. They recommend you start out, if you're not using an MDF or a spoil board, you use the lowest setting. And I do recommend that also, because the higher you go in the setting, you add a little bit of flex to the machine. So I have mine set on the middle setting, and I still find that I have plenty of Z heights for everything I do.
Okay, and that's set. You can set that independent.
No, the height. What machine do you have?
I have the HD5.
So when you assembled that gantry, you had a set of screws along the sides of the gantry, and if you followed the manual, you probably have it setting at its lowest height right now.
I'll have to. I don't know. I don't remember what that is.
Well, look at the side of your gantry. You'll see some extra sets of holes.
Yeah.
And so, like I said, I put mine at the middle setting. And then I put my 2 layers on my table, and I've had no problem with the height issue on that.
Okay. Sounds good.
Okay. Anybody
you.
else? All right. Well, thanks everybody for hanging in. I will see you next week, and I'll get this information sent out to you, by tomorrow evening. And I look forward to talking next week.
Thank you. Go see
Thank
your
you.
grandchild.
All right. You bet.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good night, everybody.
Good night.